The 5-year-old pup ripped the moonstone crown from her father's hands and hurled it across the marble floor. The entire Shadow Moon pack watched in frozen horror as the sacred crown, blessed by the moon goddess herself, worn by Luna queens for 8 centuries, clattered across polished stone and came to rest at the feet of a trembling Omega servant girl covered in kitchen grease. Alpha King Drake Nightclaw stood paralyzed mid-ceremony. His hands still outstretched toward his chosen Luna, Seraphine Silverblood, whose platinum hair remained perfectly arranged, whose emerald eyes had gone cold as winter ice. The crown had never been rejected. Not in 800 years of pack history. Not once. But little Isabella Nightclaw wasn't finished. The child walked through the stunned silence of noble wolves and honored guests, her small feet padding across the floor in her white ceremonial dress. She picked up the moonstone crown with both tiny hands, turned toward the Omega girl trembling in the shadows and raised it high. "She's the real Luna," Isabella declared, her voice far older than her 5 years. "The moon goddess showed me." Then her finger pointed directly at Seraphine. "And she showed me what she did. She killed my mama." If you're already hooked and want to see how an invisible Omega servant becomes the chosen Luna while exposing a murderer who fooled an entire kingdom, hit that subscribe button right now and join the pack. Tap that like button to show the moon goddess you're here for this journey. And howl out in the comments where you're watching from, whether you're in New York, London, Geneva or anywhere in between, so I know which pack members are running with us tonight. Trust me, you're going to need your pack family for this emotional journey. Because what happens next will shatter everything you thought you knew about fate, justice, and the bonds that transcend every rule society creates. Let me take you back 7 months before that impossible moment. Back to when everything seemed perfectly arranged. Back to when Alpha King Drake Nightclaw believed he had finally found the Luna his pack deserved. Drake was not a young alpha. At 36 he had led the Shadow Moon pack through territorial wars, political upheaval and challenges that would have broken lesser leaders. His shoulders bore scars from battles that should have killed him. His dark eyes carried the weight of decisions that had saved his pack but cost him pieces of his soul. He was respected, feared, admired. But he was alone. His mate, his true mate Lyanna, had died 4 years ago under mysterious circumstances. A sudden illness that no healer could identify, that struck like lightning and extinguished her light within 3 days. She'd left behind questions that haunted Drake's sleep and a daughter who still cried for her mother in the dark hours before dawn. The official explanation was a rare poison from contaminated food. An accident. Tragedy. Drake had never fully believed it. But without evidence, without witnesses, without anything but a father's grief-stricken instinct, what could he do? He'd buried his mate. He'd raised their daughter alone. And he'd carried the guilt of failing to protect Lyanna like a stone in his chest. For 4 years, Drake had focused solely on 2 things: his pack's stability and his daughter's happiness. But his council had grown insistent. Without a Luna, the pack was vulnerable to political maneuvering. Without a Luna, their alliances were weak. Without a Luna, Drake's own position could be challenged. Then Seraphine Silverblood entered his life like a calculated storm. Beautiful beyond mortal measure. Confident. Educated in the finest pack academies. Daughter of Alpha Cassius Silverblood, whose family controlled 3 neighboring territories. When she walked, she commanded rooms. When she spoke, even hardened warriors listened. She had platinum hair that caught moonlight like captured starlight. Green eyes that seemed to see through pretense. Porcelain skin that had never known hard labor. She looked exactly like what a Luna queen should be. Drake's council practically worshipped her. His beta, Marcus Thornheart, sang her praises at every meeting. His warriors respected her tactical mind. Even the pack elders, notoriously impossible to please, nodded their approval when Drake announced his intention to make Seraphine his chosen Luna. "She's perfect," Marcus had said, gripping Drake's shoulder. "Strong bloodline. Brilliant mind. Impeccable connections. The pack will thrive under her leadership." Drake had agreed. On paper, on every logical measure, Seraphine was flawless. She wasn't his true mate. That gift had been given and taken by the moon goddess already. But she was the intelligent choice. The strategic choice. The right choice. So why did something twist in his gut every time she smiled at him? He dismissed it as grief. As the guilt of moving forward when part of him still belonged to Lyanna's memory. He told himself that what he felt for Seraphine didn't need to be love. Not yet. But it could grow into partnership. Respect. Something solid enough to build a future on. He'd been catastrophically wrong. But he hadn't known that 7 months ago when he'd announced the upcoming Luna coronation to the pack. He hadn't known it when Seraphine had smiled at him with those perfect lips and thanked him for the honor of becoming his Luna. He hadn't known it when he'd commissioned the Moonstone crown to be prepared. The same sacred crown that had adorned every Luna queen of the Shadow Moon pack for generations. 7 months ago, there was only one person who seemed uncertain about the match. One person whose opinion Drake had dismissed as a child's irrational fear, as the anxiety of someone too young to understand adult necessities. Isabella had hated Seraphine from the first moment. From the instant Seraphine had entered their home, the 5-year-old had hidden behind her father's legs. When Seraphine had tried to embrace her, Isabella had screamed as though burned. When she'd attempted to read her bedtime stories, Isabella had thrown the books and run from the room sobbing. Drake had apologized endlessly, explaining that his daughter was still grieving, still adjusting, still too young to understand that he needed to provide her with a mother figure. Seraphine had smiled graciously. "I understand," she'd said, her voice like honey over ice. "Children are difficult. She'll come around in time. They always do once they learn proper discipline." She'd been patient for approximately 2 weeks. After that, Drake began noticing small things. The way Seraphine's smile never reached her eyes when Isabella entered a room. The way she'd suggest the child spend more time with the pack nannies, or visit relatives, or really, anywhere that wasn't near Seraphine. The way she'd flinch with barely concealed irritation when Isabella accidentally spilled something or made too much noise during council meetings. "She needs structure," Seraphine had said one evening, her voice perfectly modulated and reasonable. "You're too indulgent with her, Drake. A future pack leader must learn discipline early. Boundaries. Consequences. My father raised me with absolute clarity about expectations, and look how well I turned out." Drake had felt ice settle in his stomach at those words. But he'd nodded. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps his grief had made him too soft, too permissive. Perhaps Isabella needed a firmer hand. He'd been so focused on logic, on duty, on doing what was right for the pack that he'd stopped listening to the warning bells ringing in his heart. He'd stopped listening to his daughter's terror. And in the shadows of the pack house, invisible to everyone who mattered, an Omega servant named Chantel Eastclaw was watching everything unfold with growing dread. Drake stood alone at Lyanna's memorial stone, his hand pressed against the cold marble as dawn light filtered through the ancient oaks. 4 years. 4 years since the fever had taken her, since the healers had stood helpless while his mate slipped away despite every treatment, every prayer, every desperate bargain he'd tried to strike with the moon goddess. The official cause had been some rare illness, contaminated food perhaps, but the uncertainty gnawed at him worse than any confirmed tragedy ever could. He came here every year on this date. Every year he promised Lyanna he was doing his best. Every year the promise felt more like a lie. Isabella still woke crying for her mama. And Drake still had no answers to give her. "Alpha King." Marcus Thornhart's voice cut through his grief. His beta approached with 3 council members, their faces grave. "We need to speak about the pack's future." Drake didn't turn from the memorial. "Not today, Marcus. Especially today." His beta moved to stand beside him, voice dropping low. "The Northern Pack is making moves on our eastern border. The Riverside Pack is questioning our trade agreements. Without a Luna we look weak. Vulnerable. You know this, Drake." He did know. He'd known for 2 years. But knowing and accepting were different beasts entirely. The council surrounded him like wolves circling prey. They'd brought a list of candidates, daughters of allied alphas, widows of noble blood, all carefully vetted and politically advantageous. But one name rose above the others like a crimson banner. Seraphine Silverblood. "Cassius Silverblood controls 3 territories," Marcus pressed. "His daughter is educated, brilliant, trained for leadership since birth. The alliance alone would secure our borders for a generation." Drake closed his eyes. "Duty. Always duty. Arrange a meeting," he said finally. Seraphine arrived 1 week later, and Drake understood immediately why his council was so insistent. She moved through his council chambers like she already owned them, platinum hair cascading over shoulders draped in silk, green eyes assessing everything with calculated precision. When she spoke about pack unity and diplomatic strategy, even his most skeptical advisors leaned forward to listen. "I have great respect for Luna Lyona's legacy," Seraphine said, her voice smooth as poisoned wine. "I could never replace her. But I could honor her by ensuring the pack she loved continues to thrive." The words were perfect. The delivery flawless. Drake felt absolutely nothing. No spark, no warmth, no recognition of fate. But he saw the strategic brilliance. He saw his council's approval. He saw his duty mapped out before him like a battle plan. He agreed to formal courtship. That evening he introduced Seraphine to Isabella. His daughter took one look at the beautiful stranger and went rigid with terror. She backed away slowly, then turned and ran, her small voice echoing through the halls. "No. No. Send her away." Drake found Isabella hiding under her bed, clutching her mother's stuffed wolf, trembling. That night she woke screaming. Drake rushed to her room to find her sobbing, her small body shaking with terror. "The lady," she gasped between sobs. "The lady with cold hands. He hurt Mama. She hurt her and Mama couldn't breathe." "Shoo, sweetheart." Drake pulled her close, his heart cracking. "It was just a bad dream. Just a dream." But Isabella wouldn't be comforted. "She's bad, Papa. He's bad. Don't let her stay." Drake held his daughter until she finally exhausted herself into sleep. He told himself it was anxiety about change, fear of losing another mother figure, the trauma of loss manifesting in nightmares. He told himself children didn't understand adult necessities. He told himself he was making the right choice. By morning he'd sent word to Seraphine Silverblood. The courtship would proceed. Chantal's hands were submerged in scalding water before the first rays of dawn touched the horizon. At 24 she'd perfected the art of invisibility, moving through the Shadowmoon pack house like a ghost in gray, her footsteps silent, her presence unremarkable, her existence reduced to the tasks that defined her worth. Scrub. Rinse. Serve. Disappear. The Omega quarters were tucked behind the kitchens, a cramped collection of narrow rooms that housed 30 servants in a space meant for 15. No windows. No privacy. Just thin pallets on hard floors and the perpetual smell of lye soap and exhaustion. They wore identical gray tunics, deliberately shapeless and colorless, designed to make them indistinguishable from one another. Interchangeable. Replaceable. The rules were absolute. Never make eye contact with higher ranks, never speak unless directly questioned, never form attachments outside their caste. Omegas weren't permitted to attend pack meetings, pursue education or seek legal representation. They existed in the margins of pack life, seen only when needed, forgotten the moment the work was done. But Chantal had learned to find small rebellions in the monotony. The satisfaction of bread dough responding perfectly to her hands, rising golden and fragrant in the ovens. The brief warmth of morning sunlight stealing through the kitchen window before the demands of the day consumed her. The whispered conversations with other Omegas during stolen moments of rest. Fleeting connections that reminded her she was still human, still capable of feeling something beyond bone-deep weariness. She dreamed sometimes, though she knew she shouldn't. Dreams of being seen, of mattering, of a life where her voice carried weight instead of vanishing into silence. Those dreams felt like betrayal. Everything changed the day the Alpha King announced his courtship of Seraphine Silverblood. The pack house erupted into frenzied preparation, every surface polished to mirror brightness, every meal an elaborate display of wealth and sophistication. The Omega workforce doubled their hours, then tripled them. Chantal's hands cracked and bled from constant washing. Her back ached from bending over counters for 18 hours straight. Sleep became a luxury measured in minutes. And the whispers began. "They say the new Luna wants to modernize the servant quarters," old Marta murmured one night, her weathered face grave. "Modernize means fewer of us. Means some won't have positions anymore." "Where would we go?" someone asked. No one had an answer. Omegas without pack positions became rogues. And rogues didn't survive long. The formal courtship dinner arrived with suffocating grandeur. Chantal moved through the great hall with a tray of wine, her eyes trained on the floor, her movements practiced and precise. She approached the head table where Alpha King Drake sat beside Seraphine Silverblood, whose platinum hair caught the candlelight like a crown already won. Chantal poured wine with steady hands, careful not to spill, careful not to exist beyond the function she performed. Then she felt it, a gaze like a physical touch. She glanced up reflexively and found herself locked in the stare of a 5-year-old child. Isabella Nightclaw sat beside her father, ignoring her food, her large eyes fixed on Chantal with unsettling intensity. Those eyes seemed to see through flesh and bone, straight into Chantal's hidden dreams and secret fears. Their gazes held for a heartbeat. In that instant Chantal felt something impossible. A pull, a recognition, as though an invisible thread had been drawn between them by hands far greater than mortal. The moon goddess herself seemed to whisper, "Pay attention. This matters." Then Chantal remembered herself, dropped her eyes and retreated into the shadows where she belonged. But the feeling remained, burning in her chest like a brand. Something had just changed. Something irrevocable. And Chantal had no idea whether it meant salvation or destruction. Seraphine's Silverblood moved into the pack house like winter claiming territory, beautiful, inevitable and merciless. In public she was perfection incarnate. She deferred to Drake with practiced grace, charmed the council with strategic brilliance, and spoke of pack unity with the eloquence of someone born to rule. The nobles adored her. The warriors respected her. Even the elders nodded approval at her every carefully calculated word. But the moment the council chamber doors closed, the moment she crossed from public performance into private domain, her mask cracked like ice over deep water. The servants saw it first. Seraphine's new household rules were issued within hours of her arrival. Servants were to avert their eyes completely in her presence, not merely downcast, but fixed on the floor as though her very existence was too radiant to witness. They were to speak only when directly questioned, and then only to answer precisely what was asked. Tasks were to be completed according to standards that shifted without warning, contradictory demands delivered with cold expectation of perfection. Nothing was ever adequate. Meals were cold even when steaming. Floors were inadequately polished despite gleaming. Flower arrangements displeased her aesthetic sensibilities. And through it all, Seraphine smiled that perfect smile and spoke in that perfectly modulated voice, making each criticism sound like patient instruction rather than systematic cruelty. Chantal was cleaning the main corridor when she heard the sobbing. Young Alara, barely 16, stood trembling before Seraphine, tears streaming down her face as the future Luna enumerated her failures in excruciating detail. The girl had brought tea 30 seconds late. 30 seconds. And Seraphine was destroying her with words sharp as surgical blades, dissecting every flaw, every inadequacy, every reason Alara was a burden to the pack's resources. "Perhaps you'd be better suited to less demanding work," Seraphine finished, her voice honey-sweet. "I'll speak to the head of household about reassignment." Alara fled. Everyone knew reassignment meant exile. It meant becoming rogue. It meant death, just slower. That evening, Chantal overheard Seraphine speaking to the head of household in clipped, efficient tones about streamlining the Omega staff. Too many resources wasted on expendable ranks. Better to reduce numbers, increase efficiency, modernize operations. The words were dressed in administrative language, but Chantal understood what she was hearing. Ethnic cleansing disguised as economic policy. Fear spread through the Omega quarters like poison through water. But Seraphine's cruelty wasn't reserved for servants alone. Chantal was delivering fresh linens when she heard Isabella's small voice, tight with defiance. "You're not my mama. I don't have to call you that." The crack of Seraphine's palm against wood made Chantal freeze. "You will learn respect, child. Your father indulges your tantrums, but I will not. You need structure. Discipline. You will spend the evening in your room contemplating proper behavior. I hate you." Isabella's voice broke on a sob. Chantal heard Drake's heavy footsteps, heard his sharp intervention, heard the false sweetness return to Seraphine's voice as she explained the child's difficult nature and the need for firm boundaries. Through a crack in the door, Chantal saw something flicker across Drake's face. Doubt, concern, a flash of recognition that something was deeply wrong. But then it was gone, rationalized away, buried beneath duty and political necessity. That night, lying on her thin pallet, Chantal felt something forbidden burning in her chest. Anger. Raw, righteous, dangerous anger. For the first time in her life she questioned everything she'd been taught. The hierarchy that placed monsters above innocents. The silence that made her complicit in suffering. The rules that demanded she remain invisible while cruelty flourished in plain sight. She thought of Isabella's terrified sobs, of Alara's tears, of every Omega who would be streamlined once Seraphine wore the Luna crown. And Chantal realized with terrible clarity, if no one stopped this woman, the pack would drown in her ambition. But who would listen to an Omega servant who barely existed? Who could possibly stop a woman destined to be queen? Chantal was carrying fresh linens to the garden storage when she heard it, a sound so unexpected it stopped her in her tracks. Laughter. Pure, uninhibited, joyful laughter. She peered through the hedgerow and saw something that made her chest ache. Alpha King Drake Nightclaw, still dressed in his training leathers with dirt on his knees, was galloping through the flower beds with Isabella perched on his shoulders, her small hands tangled in his dark hair. The fierce warrior king who commanded armies and struck fear into rival packs had been utterly conquered by a 5-year-old with a flower crown and an imagination. Faster, horsey! Isabella shrieked with delight, kicking her heels gently against his chest. Drake neighed dramatically, rearing up and making her squeal before taking off in an exaggerated gallop that had her laughing so hard she could barely hold on. In that moment, every line of grief and duty had vanished from his face. He was simply a father, transformed by his daughter's happiness into something unguarded and beautiful. This was the man beneath the crown, Chantal realized. This was who Drake could be if the weight of leadership wasn't crushing the life from him. And it was devastatingly clear that he would die for this child. Would sacrifice anything for her happiness. Which made it all the more terrible that he couldn't see the danger he was walking her toward. Drake. Seraphine's voice cut through the laughter like a blade through silk. She stood at the garden entrance, immaculately dressed in deep burgundy, not a hair out of place, her expression registering cold disapproval. "What are you doing?" Drake's smile faded. He lifted Isabella down gently, suddenly conscious of the dirt on his clothes, the impropriety of an alpha king playing in the gardens like a common wolf. "Just spending time with my daughter," he said, but his voice had lost its warmth. "Rolling in the dirt like common pack members." Seraphine's tone was perfectly pleasant, which somehow made the criticism sharper. "We have important matters to discuss. The council is waiting." Isabella's small hand gripped her father's sleeve. "Papa, no. Stay. Please." Seraphine didn't even glance at the child. "Run along, Isabella. Your father has responsibilities." Then turning back to Drake with that calculated smile, "I wanted to discuss the Crescent Ridge Academy. I've arranged for Isabella's enrollment starting next month. The education there is unparalleled, and the social connections she'll make are invaluable for a future pack leader." Drake's face went carefully neutral, but Chantal saw the flicker of hesitation. "She's only 5. Exactly the right age to begin proper training. My father sent me at 6 and look how well I turned out." Seraphine's hand rested possessively on Drake's arm. "You've been wonderful with her, but she needs structure now. Discipline. Things only a formal institution can provide." From her hidden position behind the hedge, Chantal watched the entire scene unfold like a horror she couldn't prevent. She saw Drake's resistance warring with political pressure, duty battling instinct. She saw the exact moment he began to yield, his shoulders sagging with the weight of what he thought was right. But most horrifying, she saw Isabella's face. The child understood with terrible clarity what was happening. Terror flooded those young eyes. The recognition that she was being sent away, that her father was choosing duty over her, that the cold woman with perfect words was winning. And she saw Seraphine's expression as Drake nodded slowly, agreeing to consider the academy. Pure satisfaction flickered across those beautiful features for just an instant before the mask of concern slid back into place. This wasn't about education. This was about removal. Elimination. Seraphine was systematically separating Drake from everyone who might question her, isolating him, preparing the ground for complete control. Chantal retreated silently, her heart pounding. That night she lay awake on her thin pallet while other Omegas slept fitfully around her. The weight of knowledge pressed against her chest like a physical thing. She knew what Seraphine was doing. She saw the pattern, the manipulation, the cruelty disguised as concern. But what could she possibly do? An Omega accusing a high-ranking Luna candidate would be dismissed as jealousy, delusion, or insubordination. Her word meant nothing against Seraphine's political power and cultivated image. Speaking out would only get her exiled, or worse, and accomplish nothing. Yet staying silent meant watching Isabella be sent away. Meant watching Seraphine tighten her grip around Drake's throat. Meant being complicit in whatever horror was coming. Chantal stared at the ceiling, trapped between impossible choices, and felt the terrible guilt of powerlessness eating her alive. Chantal was scrubbing the floors of the private wing long after midnight when she heard the voices. Low, confident, coming from Seraphine's chambers where a sliver of lamplight escaped through the door left carelessly ajar. She should have walked away immediately. Being caught eavesdropping on nobility meant exile at best, execution at worst. But something, instinct, fate, the moon goddess herself, rooted her feet to the floor. Congratulations, daughter. The male voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. Alpha Cassius Silverblood. Drake signed the bonding agreement this morning. The ceremony is set for the next full moon. It was almost too easy. Seraphine's laugh was cold crystal breaking. The fool is so consumed by duty and guilt, he'd bind himself to a viper if his counsel recommended it. And the child. Winterhold Academy accepts her the day after the coronation. I've already transferred the payment. The administrators understand that certain heirs require isolation for their own protection. She'll be comfortable enough. Forgotten but comfortable. Chantal's blood turned to ice. Winterhold wasn't an academy. It was a prison for inconvenient children of noble blood, a place where heirs disappeared into obscurity and never emerged. Smart, Cassius approved. Once she's gone, you can focus on producing legitimate heirs. Your children will inherit and the brat becomes irrelevant. If she even survives to adulthood in that place. Seraphine's voice held no emotion at all. But that's hardly my concern. Now about the Omega situation. I've drafted legislation to reclassify them as contract laborers rather than pack members. It will pass easily once I'm Luna. We can sell the useful ones to allied packs and exile the rest. The cost savings alone will win council support. Chantal pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle her gasp. They were talking about selling people. Her people. Like livestock. Efficient, Cassius said. You've learned well. Though I must say, I'm impressed you've managed to keep Drake blind to your nature this long. His mate was more perceptive. The pause that followed made Chantal's skin crawl. Yes, well. Seraphine's voice dropped to something almost tender, almost proud. The same solution that worked on Lyanna will work on Drake eventually. Once my position is secured, once I've produced heirs, he becomes expendable. The poison is slow, untraceable. People will mourn the tragic Alpha King who followed his beloved mate into death. Patience, daughter. Cassius chuckled darkly. Wait at least a year. 2 would be better. Suspicion is tedious to manage. Of course, father. I've waited this long. I can wait a little longer to become widow and regent both. They moved toward the door and Chantal fled on silent feet, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. She made it to the servants' stairwell, down into the shadows, pressed herself against cold stone and fought the urge to vomit. Seraphine had murdered Lyanna. Had poisoned Drake's mate, Isabella's mother, had orchestrated her death and walked into the grieving pack wearing a mask of sympathy. And now she was planning to eliminate Isabella, enslave the Omegas and eventually murder Drake himself. The conspiracy was vast, meticulous and utterly monstrous. Chantal's hands shook as she stumbled back to the Omega quarters. She wanted to scream, to run to Drake, to grab him by his royal collar and force him to see the viper coiled around his throne. But who would believe her? An Omega servant with no proof except her word against a politically connected Luna candidate? They'd call her delusional, jealous, hysterical. They'd exile her for slander before Seraphine even had to lift a finger. And if she warned the other Omegas, spread these accusations through the servant quarters, it would only get back to Seraphine faster. They'd all be punished for her insubordination. She was utterly powerless. Trapped by her rank, her invisibility, the very hierarchies designed to keep her silent. That night, Chantal lay awake in the darkness, trembling with rage and terror and the crushing weight of knowledge she couldn't use. Somewhere above her, Seraphine Silverblood slept peacefully, her plans unfolding perfectly. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing Chantal could do to stop her. The coronation was 3 weeks away. 3 days. The coronation was 3 days away, and the pack house thrummed with frantic preparation. Chantal moved through her endless duties like a ghost, polishing silver that would crown a murderer, arranging flowers for a ceremony that would seal Drake's death warrant, preparing food for a celebration that would destroy them all. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and cold and utterly useless. She was carrying fresh linens through the family wing near midnight when she heard it. A scream that made her blood freeze in her veins. Not the ordinary cry of a child's nightmare, but something primal and terrified, a sound of such pure anguish it bypassed thought and struck directly at instinct. Isabella. Chantal knew the rules. Omegas did not enter noble chambers uninvited. The punishment for such presumption was severe. But her feet were moving before her mind could catch up, dropping the linens, pushing through the door into Isabella's room where the child thrashed in her bed like something was trying to drag her into darkness. Isabella. Chantal rushed to the bedside, kneeling on the plush carpet she'd cleaned 100 times. Sweetheart, you're safe. I promise you're safe. The child's eyes snapped open and Chantal's breath caught. For one impossible moment, Isabella's eyes weren't brown. They glowed with silver light, ethereal and ancient, the unmistakable touch of the moon goddess herself. Then Isabella's small hand shot out, gripping Chantal's wrist with shocking strength, and words poured from her mouth in a voice too old for her years. She killed Mama. The poison cup. The lady with cold hands gave it to her. Mama couldn't breathe. She tried to tell Papa but the words wouldn't come. She died with his name on her lips and the truth trapped in her throat. Isabella's face crumpled, tears streaming. Mama showed me. He comes in my dreams and shows me everything. The bad lady killed her and nobody believes me and now she's going to send me away and hurt Papa too. I believe you. The words left Chantal's mouth before she could stop them, before fear or protocol or common sense could intervene. I believe you, Isabella. I heard her. I heard Seraphine talking about it. About what she did to your mother. About what she plans to do to you and your father. Isabella went utterly still, her silver-lit eyes searching Chantal's face with desperate intensity. You heard her? Yes. Chantal's voice broke. I heard everything. The academy that isn't an academy. The poison. All of it. And I believe every word you've seen in your visions. The sob that tore from Isabella's chest was relief and anguish combined. She launched herself into Chantal's arms, small body shaking with the force of months of terror finally acknowledged. You see me. You actually see me. Everyone else says I'm making things up, that I'm upset about the wedding, that I don't understand grown-up things. But Mama showed me the truth and nobody would listen. I'm listening. Chantal held her tight, this child she had no right to comfort, this precious soul everyone had failed. I'm listening and I believe you and I swear on the moon goddess herself, I will help you stop her. Isabella pulled back, her small face fierce with desperate hope. You promise? You'll help me save Papa. I promise. Chantal didn't know how. She had no power, no voice, no way to stand against someone like Seraphine Silverblood. But looking into Isabella's eyes, those eyes that still held traces of divine silver, she knew she would find a way or die trying. We'll figure this out together. You're my secret friend, Isabella whispered, clutching her mother's worn stuffed wolf. The only one who listens. Over the next 3 days they met in stolen moments, in shadowed corners of the garden, in empty hallways during shift changes, in those precious minutes when Chantal could slip away unnoticed. She taught Isabella that her visions were a gift from her mother's spirit, not a curse or madness. She helped her understand the fragments, piece together the warnings, validate the truth that everyone else refused to see. And Isabella, with the pure trust of a child who had finally found someone worthy of it, treated Chantal like she mattered. Like she was important. Like her life meant something beyond scrubbing floors and remaining invisible. For the first time in her 24 years, Chantal felt seen. The coronation was tomorrow. And somehow together they would have to find a way to stop it. Isabella's defiance erupted like a dam finally breaking. 2 days before the coronation she stopped pretending, stopped trying to be the obedient daughter her father needed her to be. When Seraphine entered a room, Isabella fled. When the future Luna spoke to her, Isabella turned her face away in stony silence. And when anyone asked about the upcoming ceremony, the child announced in a clear, carrying voice, "She's not my mama and she never will be. My real mama is dead and that lady killed her." Drake was drowning under the pressure. His council demanded he control his daughter. Seraphine's family implied the child needed firmer discipline. And Drake himself felt torn between concern for Isabella's obvious distress and the political catastrophe of calling off the bonding now, mere days before the ceremony. He tried talking to his daughter. She wouldn't explain. He tried comforting her. She pulled away. He was losing her and he didn't understand why. Then he found her in the gardens. He'd been searching for Isabella for an hour when he finally heard her voice, bright with animation coming from behind the rose hedges. And this one is called a dandelion, but Chantal says they're not weeds even though everybody treats them like they don't matter. She says they're brave because they grow everywhere people don't want them. Drake rounded the hedge and froze. Isabella sat cross-legged in the grass, clutching a fistful of dandelions, talking to someone kneeling beside her in a gray servant's tunic. Chantal, he'd seen her around the pack house, always moving silently, always invisible, was listening to his daughter with such focused attention, such genuine affection, that it made his chest ache. His daughter was smiling. Actually smiling. Happy in a way he hadn't seen since Lyanna died. He took a step forward and Chantal's head snapped up. She leaped to her feet so fast she nearly stumbled, eyes fixed on the ground, terror written across every line of her body. "Forgive me, Alpha King. I didn't mean to presume. You're her secret friend." Drake's voice came out rougher than he intended, thick with emotion he couldn't name. "The one she's been talking about." Chantal trembled but said nothing. Isabella scrambled to her feet, positioning herself protectively between her father and the Omega servant. "Don't be mad at Chantal, Papa. He's nice to me. She listens." The simple words cut deeper than any blade. She listens. As if Drake hadn't been listening. As if he'd failed his daughter so completely that she'd found comfort in the arms of a servant who had no right to touch her but every reason to understand being invisible and powerless. Drake looked at Chantal, really looked at her for the first time. Saw the calloused hands, the exhausted eyes, the fear of someone who knew she'd crossed an unforgivable boundary. But he also saw genuine love in the way she'd been looking at Isabella. Protection. Care. Things his daughter desperately needed and he'd been too blind to provide. "What has my daughter told you?" he asked quietly. Chantal's breath shook. This was the moment. She could lie, could deflect, could protect herself. Or she could trust the man whose mate had been murdered, whose daughter was trying desperately to warn him, whose life was hanging by a poisoned thread. "That she's afraid of Lady Seraphine," Chantal whispered, making a choice that could destroy her. "That she dreams of her mother's death. That she believes your mate was murdered." The world tilted beneath Drake's feet. He dismissed Isabella's nightmares as trauma, as a child's inability to process loss. But hearing those same fears spoken by an adult, hearing the conviction in this Omega's voice, forced him to confront what he'd been refusing to see. He didn't fully believe it. Not yet. The accusation was too monstrous, too calculated. But something in Chantal's eyes told him she wasn't lying. And something in his gut, that instinct he'd been ignoring for months, suddenly screamed that he needed to pay attention. "You have my permission to continue seeing Isabella," he said finally, watching shock bloom across Chantal's face. "More than that, I'm granting you entry to the Luna coronation ceremony tomorrow. Everyone deserves to witness history, even those who work in the shadows." It was a small gesture. A kindness that cost him nothing. But for Chantal, it felt like the moon goddess herself had finally heard her prayers. For the first time since overhearing that terrible conversation, she dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to stop the monster wearing a crown. The great hall of the Shadow Moon Pack blazed with candlelight and ceremony. Hundreds of witnesses filled the ancient space. Allied alphas in their formal regalia, nobility draped in silk and jewels, pack members dressed in their finest to witness history being made. The air thrummed with anticipation and the scent of ritual incense. Chantal stood at the very back, pressed against the cold stone wall where servants had been grudgingly permitted to observe. Her cleanest gray tunic felt impossibly inadequate among such splendor, but Drake's permission had granted her this impossible privilege. Her heart hammered against her ribs as her eyes found Isabella in the front row. The child sat rigid in her white ceremonial gown, hands clenched so tight in her lap that her knuckles had gone bloodless. Her face was pale as death, her eyes fixed on the altar with the intensity of someone watching her world end in real time. Drake stood at the altar and Chantal's breath caught. He was magnificent, all warrior king in formal black leather and silver ceremonial armor, his dark hair falling to his shoulders, his own alpha crown glinting in the candlelight. But his eyes were haunted, and his jaw was tight with tension that spoke of a man walking toward something he couldn't escape. Then Seraphine appeared and the hall fell into reverent silence. She glided down the aisle like winter incarnate, devastating and merciless. Her gown was white silk embroidered with gold thread that caught the light with every step, making her seem to glow from within. Her platinum hair had been arranged in elaborate braids woven through with pearls. Her porcelain skin was flawless, her emerald eyes serene. She looked like a goddess descending from the heavens to bless mere mortals with her presence. She looked exactly like what a Luna Queen should be. The pack elders began the ancient ritual, their voices rising in ceremonial chant. Seraphine took her place beside Drake and he turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. The head elder raised the moonstone crown, 8 centuries old, blessed by the moon goddess herself, adorned with ancient stones that pulsed with ethereal silver light. By the power vested in me by the moon goddess and the ancestors of the Shadow Moon Pack, the elder intoned, I present the sacred crown to Alpha King Drake Nightclaw, who will place it upon the head of his chosen Luna, binding them in leadership and in life. Drake's hands closed around the crown. It felt heavier than it should, as if the weight of history itself pressed against his palms. He lifted it high and the assembled witnesses held their collective breath. Seraphine tilted her head back, her smile serene and triumphant. Victory gleamed in her green eyes. In moments she would be Luna Queen. Untouchable. Unassailable. And then her plans could truly begin. Drake lowered the crown toward her platinum hair. Then Isabella screamed. Not a child's cry of distress, but something primal and supernaturally resonant. A sound that seemed to tear through the fabric of reality itself. The scream froze everyone in place, hundreds of wolves locked in suspended horror as the 5-year-old child lunged from her seat. Isabella's small hands seized the moonstone crown from her father's startled grip. For one impossible heartbeat, she held it aloft, the ancient artifact blazing with sudden brilliant silver light in her grasp. Then she threw it. The sacred crown, never rejected, never refused in 800 years, tumbled through the air and crashed against the marble floor with a sound like thunder. It rolled, moonstones flashing, silver light pulsing with increasing intensity, until it came to rest at the feet of an Omega servant girl trembling in the shadows. At Chantal's feet. The hall erupted in chaos, gasps, shouts, movement, but Isabella wasn't finished. The child walked through the frozen assembly of noble wolves, her white gown trailing behind her, her face transformed by something far older than her 5 years. She picked up the moonstone crown with both small hands. She turned toward Chantal, who stood paralyzed with terror and disbelief. And she raised the crown high. She's the real Luna, Isabella declared, her voice carrying through the hall with supernatural clarity. The moon goddess showed me. She told me the truth. Then Isabella's finger pointed directly at Seraphine, whose beautiful face had gone white with rage and something else. Unmistakable, undeniable fear. And she showed me what she did, Isabella continued, her young voice cracking with fury and grief. She killed my mama. She poisoned her. I saw it. Mama showed me everything. And nobody would listen. The hall exploded into pandemonium. But Isabella, guided by forces beyond mortal understanding, placed the moonstone crown directly on Chantal's head. The world went white. The ancient crown erupted with brilliant silver fire, light so pure and intense it seemed to burn away shadow itself. The assembled witnesses threw up their hands, shielding their eyes from the divine radiance that blazed from the simple Omega servant's head like a star born in the darkness. This was the sign. The blessing not seen in 8 centuries. The moon goddess herself making her choice known. But the miracle didn't stop there. Chantal gasped as power flooded through her. Not her own power but something ancient and terrible and true. The crown's magic seized her Omega blood, her invisible heritage and used it as a conduit. Her eyes rolled back, glowing pure silver, and visions poured from her mind into the consciousness of every wolf in the hall. They saw it. All of them. Seraphine for years ago, slipping poison into Lionna's tea. Lionna's desperate attempts to breathe, to speak, to warn Drake as the toxin shut down her body. Her death not from illness but from murder. They saw Seraphine's conspiracy with her father. The plans to eliminate Isabella. The legislation to enslave the Omegas. The poison already prepared for Drake, waiting for the moment when Seraphine's position was secure enough to widow herself into permanent power. They saw everything. The vision released them and hundreds of witnesses stood gasping, tears streaming down their faces, horror and rage and recognition flooding through them in equal measure. Seraphine stood frozen at the altar, her mask shattered, her beautiful face twisted with fury. "Lies," she shrieked, her voice losing all its cultivated grace. "The child is mad. The Omega is delusional. This is enough." Drake's voice cut through her protests like a blade through silk. He stepped forward and for the first time in 4 years his eyes were clear. No more doubt. No more dismissing his instincts. The moon goddess herself had shown him the truth. He had been courting his mate's murderer. He had been walking his daughter toward the same fate. Drake moved to stand beside Chantal, who trembled beneath the blazing crown, tears streaming down her face. He turned to face Seraphine, and his voice carried through the silent hall with absolute authority. "Seraphine Silverblood, you stand accused of murdering Luna Liona Nightclaw. The moon goddess herself has testified against you. Your conspiracy is exposed. Your crimes are known." He gestured to his warriors who moved forward immediately. "Seize her. She will be tried before the Pack Council for her crimes." Seraphine tried to run. Drake's warriors caught her before she made 3 steps, her screams of rage echoing through the hall as they dragged her away. Drake knelt before Chantal, this invisible Omega servant who wore the moonstone crown still blazing on her head like divine vindication. He looked up at her with eyes full of gratitude, grief and something else. Recognition. Respect. "Forgive me," he said, his voice breaking. "Forgive me for the years you suffered in silence. For not seeing. For not listening when I should have." He reached for her trembling hands. "The moon goddess has chosen you, Chantal Eastclaw. Not by political convenience. Not by logic or strategy. But by divine right and earned trust. Will you accept the position of Luna Queen? Will you help me lead this pack with the compassion and truth it deserves?" Chantal looked down at the Alpha King kneeling before her, at Isabella running toward her with tears of relief streaming down her small face, at the assembled pack watching with a mixture of shock and wonder. She thought of every rule she'd broken. Every moment of invisibility. Every time she'd been told she didn't matter. And she felt the moonstone crown blazing on her head, the moon goddess's blessing burning away every lie she'd ever been told about her worth. "I accept," she whispered, then stronger. "I accept." The hall erupted in stunned cheers as Isabella crashed into Chantal's arms, sobbing with relief. Drake rose and stood beside them both, not as alpha and servant, but as partners chosen by forces greater than mortal law. The Omega had become Luna Queen, and the pack would never be the same. If this story moved you, if you felt the moon goddess's blessing guiding these characters toward their destiny, then the pack needs you to make your presence known. Hit that like button to honor Chantal's journey from invisible to irreplaceable. Subscribe and join the Shadow Moon Pack so you never miss another story of fate, justice, and love that transcends every boundary. And here's where I need you to howl your truth. Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. Are you pack family from Texas, Toronto, Tokyo, Tanzania? The moon goddess connects us all no matter the distance. Because the story doesn't end here. There are more packs to explore, more Lunas whose destinies are waiting to be revealed, more secrets hidden in the moonlight. My next video drops soon and trust me, you won't want to miss what the moon goddess has in store next. The threads of fate are already weaving, and the next chapter is going to leave you breathless. Until then, may the moon goddess light your path, may your pack stay loyal, and may you always have the courage to speak truth to power like Isabella and Chantal did. Stay wild, pack family. Stay wild. The trial of Seraphine Silverblood lasted 3 days, though the verdict was never in doubt. With the evidence Chantal had stolen, the testimony of pack members who'd witnessed the shared vision, and the moon goddess's own blessing still fresh in everyone's memory, the council had no choice but to acknowledge the truth they'd been blind to for 4 years. Seraphine was stripped of her titles, her family's alliance dissolved, and she was sentenced to exile with magical binding, ancient enchantments woven into her very blood that would prevent her from ever using poison, dark magic or deception to harm another soul. She was escorted to the border by Drake's warriors, screaming threats and curses until the moment she crossed into rogue territory and vanished into the wilderness. Her father, Alpha Cassius Silverblood, faced his own reckoning. The neighboring packs he'd controlled turned on him once his daughter's conspiracy became public knowledge. Last anyone heard, he'd fled to the far northern territories, his power shattered, his reputation destroyed. Justice delayed 4 years had finally come. But justice was only the beginning. Chantal stood in the Luna's private chambers, her chambers now, and barely recognized her reflection. The gray servant's tunic was gone, replaced by elegant robes of deep blue embroidered with silver wolf motifs. Her hair, usually tied back in a practical braid, had been washed and arranged with care. The moonstone crown sat on a cushion beside her, no longer blazing with divine fire but still pulsing with gentle silver light in her presence. She was Luna, queen of the Shadow Moon Pack. An Omega who'd spent 24 years invisible had become the most visible person in the entire territory. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was exactly what the moon goddess had intended. A small knock at the door made her turn. "Come in." Isabella burst through, still in her nightgown, her honey blonde hair wild from sleep. Luna Chantal. She stopped, frustrated with protocol. Chantal knelt and opened her arms. "You can call me Chantal, sweetheart. Always." Isabella crashed into her embrace, and Chantal felt her heart expand with a love she'd never expected to know. This child who'd saved her, who'd been brave enough to trust an invisible servant, who defied an entire pack to expose the truth. This child who now called her Mama of my heart, when she thought no one was listening. "Papa says you're going to change everything," Isabella whispered against Chantal's shoulder. "He says you're going to make the pack better. That you're going to help everyone, not just the important people." "I'm going to try," Chantal promised. "With your father's help and yours." Another knock, this one deeper. Drake entered, and Chantal's breath caught as it did every time she saw him now. Not with desire, not yet, but with the recognition of partnership. Of respect earned through fire and truth. "The council is ready," Drake said gently. "Your first decree as Luna Queen." Chantal stood, Isabella's hand gripped tight in hers, and walked with Drake to the council chambers. The same nobles who'd ignored her existence for years now rose when she entered, bowing their heads in respect that still felt surreal. But Chantal hadn't forgotten where she came from. He would never forget. Her first decree abolished the worst restrictions on Omegas. They would have legal representation, access to education, and protection under pack law as full members rather than expendable servants. The council had protested initially, but the moon goddess's blessing on an Omega Luna made their objections ring hollow. Her second decree established a council position for Omega representatives, a voice at the table for those who'd been silenced too long. Her third decree launched a full investigation into all suspicious deaths during Seraphine's presence, with a promise that truth would be honored over political convenience. The changes came slowly, met with resistance and old prejudices. But Chantal was patient. She'd spent 24 years invisible. She understood the long game. And she had Drake beside her, not as a distant alpha king, but as a partner learning to trust again, to love again, to listen to the wisdom that came from unexpected places. They built something together, brick by careful brick. Respect first. Then friendship. And someday perhaps something more. 6 months after the coronation that changed everything, Chantal stood at Lionna's memorial stone with Isabella and Drake beside her. She placed fresh flowers at the base and whispered a promise. "I'll protect them," she said to the spirit of the Luna who died trying to expose the truth. "I'll love your daughter as my own. I'll help your mate heal. I'll make sure your pack becomes everything you dreamed it could be. Your sacrifice won't be forgotten. I swear it." The wind whispered through the leaves, and for just a moment Chantal felt a presence, warm, grateful, at peace. Lionna's blessing, finally able to rest now that her family was safe. Isabella squeezed her hand. Drake's arm came around her shoulders. And Chantal, the invisible Omega who became Luna Queen, the servant who wore a crown blessed by the moon goddess herself, stood with her family and felt something she'd never dared dream of feeling. He felt like she belonged. He felt like she mattered. She felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The moon goddess chooses in mysterious ways. He sees the invisible. She hears the voiceless. She lifts up the forgotten and crowns them with purpose. And sometimes the smallest voice speaks the loudest truth. Sometimes, the powerless become the most powerful force for change. Sometimes an Omega servant becomes exactly the Luna Queen the pack needs.